So despite all of my hip hop videos, I wouldn't call myself a metalhead, but I'm probably the equivalent to a white hip hop fan, a casual white hip hop fan could be to metal, if that makes sense. So it's like it's like if there's a bunch of people around like talk about metal, I can come in and be like, I really like Metallica, and ruin the mood. Like that's and so I'm like that because going back to the kind of music culture thing, I went to a relatively diverse high school. And so there was the hip hop lunch table, the popular lunch table, which maybe have hip hop, but it wasn't going to be as hip hop as the hip hop lunch table. And then I also played sports with, the white guys that were the offensive line. So I would pop up over there and they would hand me, a Megadeth CD or a Tool CD or, when I was really in high school, Stained and Korn. And so it's like that ability to traverse culture. We can't speak on it, right? Because we're old, but I do wonder what that looks like for kids today. If they have, how are they sharing culture with each other across these schisms,
Yeah, the internet, good inadvertent Tool reference there, schism. So
that's my favorite all-time band. I couldn't help it.
I think the internet has just eliminated any and all boundaries and access,
right,
or lack of access to certain sounds and certain styles that, look, back in the day, I know me personally, like being as introverted as I was in some respects, there might have been some people or some musical enclaves or subgroups that, because maybe I didn't dress like you or I didn't act like you or I didn't come from the same place as you, I might not, sort of associate with you. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that lack of a connection, you might not learn about like what they listen to or what they like or what they're into. And you may not learn that it's actually like really cool or really good. I remember like in the 2000s, that was, as far as like underground stuff, that was like a peak for so many trending left field styles, be it like anarcho-punk and emo and post-hardcore and noisecore and stuff like that, and and a lot of different blends of underground metal like doom metal and that sort of thing. But the thing is, like, all of these groups were like, had at least a little bit of like animosity toward each other, and also that was felt towards some of the older groups who, maybe be them old school punks or thrash metal heads who thought like all the new stuff was just shit.
Yeah.
Especially that emo stuff, which was weak. And of course, like associated with emo, there was a lot of homophobia too at the time.
Always the homophobia and the misogyny is such a key character in this story.
Right, exactly. So the thing is, like, all of that at that time, all of those hangups culturally would probably prevent you from traversing into different groups and, learning about, different musical movements going on and cultural movements going on at the time. I know me personally, I had the benefit of, being the music director at the college radio station where I went to school at the time. And I loved it. And I loved just kind of being at the station because everybody there who would do a music show, and that was the vast majority of what everybody did, everybody would do a music show just based on their very specific tastes, So there were people who were doing hip hop shows, there were people who were doing indie shows, there were people who were doing, metal shows and stuff like that. And I always got an opportunity to, if somebody was playing something interesting, to be able to ask them, like, what is that? It's like, is that the new this? Is that the new that? It's like, I've never heard this artist before, like, do they have an album that just came out? And just be able to kind of get my fill of what everybody's kind of hearing and listening to. And that was probably as efficient as I could get at the time. I couldn't go on like some kind of indie themed subreddit,
right?
Maybe like a message board or something like that.
At most,
I couldn't go on some indie themed subreddit. I had to actually have a conversation,
right?
And
you couldn't hashtag indie talk and then go through it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and because of like the general, I don't know, kind of chillness of the fact that even though we may not all be into the same music or kind of have the same vibe, we're all into this radio thing. That was kind of enough to, I think, have people just kind of let their guard down and just be open about maybe these other things that they wouldn't necessarily connect with other people on.
So a lot of what you said brings you to, so we're going back still in the 90s before we get to 90s hip hop I discovered I had maybe one metalhead cousin who was like a legit metalhead. And we, made fun of him because he was black, and that's what we did at the time. It was before the black nerd wave of the last 20 years, 15 years or so. But I was like, but a couple of things, I never forget hearing I'm not crazy in an institution, and being like, okay, this is, and like the Tony Hawk soundtrack as well. But I say all to say, so I started really trying to get into metal and stuff like in the late 90s into the mid 2000s. And then by the early 2010s, I was like, what happened? Where is it as a commercial entity? And, I think about, I made a joke in the Bo Burnham video that like, there was a distinct white music culture up until maybe the last decade or so. And it's now gone, which on one end is cool because that means like, there's all this like amalgamation of stuff happening. But on the other end, it's also like, I don't know, it's also like kind of watered down, it's also Jack Harlow. And of course, I'll put this on record. It's also Drake, and so it's like, all right, but Taylor Swift, etc. And so it's like, where are and so I had to find that, there is still punk and metal and new metal out there, but it's lost commercial relevance, and it's not my explicit experience. But I often wonder, like, what does that mean for people in general? What does that mean for like music culture, that this huge thing, like when we were growing up, rock music, they were the megastars of music, right? And then it was like instantly they weren't. And it became hip hop stars. And it just piggyback wherever your mind goes from that, the disappearance of metal from the mainstream and rock.
Yeah, I mean, post that point that you're talking about, like most of the metal that did kind of have some commercial success or like hit the charts, a lot of it was metalcore. If you continue these conversations, I would maybe recommend having a conversation with this guy, Finn McKenty, who does this YouTube channel called the Punk Rock MBA. And
I think I've seen him before. Yeah,
he's highly accessible and he's very knowledgeable with a lot of that stuff, and could definitely probably speak a little bit more deeply to any kind of like loud rock or metal that continued to be relevant into that era, or why it kind of fell off of relevancy. But I mean, I was like a pretty huge metal fan in the 2000s during high school, mostly out of just like, I think the need to, I guess, kind of like survive through that high school social circuit. Yeah. Because the thing is, like, you needed to find a group of people to hang out with. When I was younger, especially when I was a kid and still a very passionate music fan, I just kind of liked whatever the radio or MTV was throwing at me. And that could be anything from Nirvana to Biggie to TLC to Red Hot Chili Peppers to Beck and Boys II Men and, and also The Offspring and Green Day. Like at the time, I wasn't really thinking about like, or Rage Against the Machine. I fucking loved the shit out of Rage Against the Machine, but I wasn't really thinking about too much in terms of like, is this punk or is this metal or is this, pop, or what kind of hip hop is this that I'm listening to? All I know is that I think they rhyme good,
right. And this makes me feel good when I hear it.
Right, exactly. It's like like I wasn't putting a whole lot of thought into at the time, like what made stylistically and genre wise, like what made someone like Tupac, for example, sound different than someone like Eminem when I'm hearing, my name is Slim Shady, I wasn't really putting a whole lot of thought into that. I was just like I was just vibing because I was a child who was watching TRL on MTV and enjoying the music video for Freak on a Leash, where the bullets going through everything.
With the bullets, and then he grunts at it, and it's the most awesome thing ever in 1996. Right. What is his name? What's the singer's name?
Jonathan Davis.
It's Jonathan Davis metal grunting at a bullet, and the bullet changing its mind. So that's gone. And that's kind of the thing. That's gone from the code. Like there's memes to put it in perspective. Maybe this would be something that I'll say. We're missing memes.
Right.
There's a whole genre of memes we don't have in the cultural zeitgeist right now because there is no ridiculous metal like energy within the mainstream culture, you know? I think about Metalocalypse. I don't know if you were a fan. I loved it.
I thought that show was great.
Yeah, and I loved I guess his name's Brendan Small. I loved a lot of his stuff. And that's kind of what got me like back then realizing that this show makes sense to me because I remember when like metal was like the biggest thing in the world. But then also thinking they had a video they released for Blood Recruited. And in the comments, it was like, this is better than most stuff on the radio. And I was like, it is, because none of this is anywhere. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of Metalocalypse, like better than some of the mainstream metal stuff that was happening at the time. Because I mean, that era of metal that I was into, that I kind of like fell deeper into because, moving out of junior high into high school, and you're in a new place. And I remember the school that I started going to was in a new town. And like one of the first things that I wanted to do or was like dead set on was like, I want to transition at this point and actually like ascend beyond my station of the nerd table that, I had been sitting at up until this point. And like, basically the easiest way to make that move was to go hang out with the metalheads and the punks because they're
the most accepting, ironically.
There was no barrier to entry there. And, I already listened to some of the bands that they liked. So like, why the hell not? As a result of that, I happened to fall into this era of metal music that out of every decade of metal thus far, I think has proven to be the most disposable. Because like, I don't think, maybe it really does contend with the 80s. It does contend with the 80s. Like when you're talking about 80s hard rock and you're listing out the Quiet Riots, Motley Crues, and so on and so forth. Like, there's a lot of amazing '90s metal, be it death metal, black metal, thrash. That's when like a lot of the early. Never mind. I'm sort of messing up my decades here, but there's a lot of great, amazing, fantastic, underground metal throughout the '90s, and mainstream stuff too. That's just like mind blowing. But like, yeah, you'd really have to do a research project like decade to decade to see which decade of metal had more throwaway shit that nobody cares about anymore. But like, man, like, you could just like list the bands forever, be they like Coal Chamber or Disturbed or Stained or some that I actually I feel I'm in a position where I have a platform. I feel bad mentioning some of these names, but I'm sure some of these bands know that they're not in their heyday anymore. But groups like Power Man 5000, look, you could Google, anybody on the internet now could Google if you want. In Ozfest lineup from the mid to late 2000s.
First off, Ozfest.
Yes, Ozfest. Like Google an Ozfest poster from the, earlier mid 2000s and just look up when most of those bands put out their last record. You know what I mean? Chances are it's about in the realm of 20 years or so ago, or if it's not, most likely nobody has been listening to their last 5 albums. You know what I mean? So the thing is, like, it was such a painfully disposable era of metal that I was just so there for, and was listening to a lot of those bands and, vibing to them as a kid, while still, enjoying a lot of the groups that I still grew up listening to, but still, like, I bought into it deeply. Now, thankfully, like, there is some of it that did age fairly well and has almost like garnered a bit of like critical acclaim that older metalheads used to shit on Slipknot, for example. It's just like a dumb novelty band. But like, for example, like Iowa is a hard fucking record. Like there are still metal albums harder than Iowa from that decade. Also,
I still like System of a Down.
System of a Down was still amazing.
They still get heavy rotation.
The first time I heard Sugar, and then Love Toxicity even more when it came out. And I love how just not love, I love, but also hate how the lyrics of that record grow more relevant every
couple of years.
Right.
I introduce my favorite that is not technically, like, they're not good, but they always had the best lead singles to their records is I can't remember their names now. Polyamorous, Diary of Jane, Breaking Benjamin.
Breaking Benjamin.
Like WWE.
I never caught the Breaking Benjamin wave.
Oh, they were. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps because they were such a perfect distillation of like new metal's best commercial. Just.
You know, it was another one of those moments that I really remember was, I remember when I was a kid, the day that Papa Roach's Last Resort played on the radio, because like my mom went to pick us up from either my dad's house or school, and we put on the radio, and my mom was like something like, I heard this earlier and they've been playing it over and over because people keep calling in to ask them to replay it. And it's like, you know, and even the guy who was on the radio was like commenting on, you know, sort of like, you guys are really liking this one, so we're going to play it again. And, you know, it was just like, this is my last resort. It was just like the hardest thing that you could hear on the radio that day. And everybody in the area where I'm from was just, again, apparently like going gaga for it and calling in to have it played again and again and again.
Because it was amazing. And it's like this is a stupid reason to like miss it, right? But the best way I can convey the sadness of that being out the zeitgeist is, why isn't that a TikTok sound? Like there's so much, you see what I'm saying? Like that's stupid.
In defense of Papa Roach, if you go on TikTok, and maybe you should incorporate this in some way, they are kind of killing it on TikTok right now.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they're making a lot of TikToks and getting a lot of engagement on TikTok right now. I don't know how
I had to look it up.
Doing it, but they are doing it. Shout out to Papa Roach for kind of, you know, making.
They did just release an album. Is it this year?
They might have. They've also been like, I believe the lead singer has also been doing like some collabs with some alternative TikTok stars too. Okay. Like appearing on their songs and stuff. So there is like kind of some intergenerational crossover going there.
As long as they're not doing what the guy from Stained is doing.
Yeah, as long as they're not doing
right. That. So all right, we got to move. Let's move into the same time frame, but now we're on hip hop.